So here we've got the pieces. This is the front piece here, and you can see we've got a bust dart on each side. There's no waist dart. Because this is an all-in-one lined piece, I figured you'd probably have to pull it over your head anyway, because there's no opening for a zip, although you probably could sneak one under the arm. And then the back is all one piece as well. And because I was thinking about pulling it over the head, I've taken the darts out of the back too. So it's not tested. I'm not sure if this is actually big enough to pull over your head, but I think it might just be.
Looks like it would be right.
Cool.
What pattern? How have you made that pattern, Mark?
Oh, so this is just off the fitted bodice block, and I've taken the shoulder in for a more cutaway armhole, and I've widened the neck as well. Because there's no neck opening, it's really important to make the neck big enough to actually go over your head. Otherwise you can finish the garment and then it'll fit on the dummy because the dummy doesn't have a head, but if you try and put it on a person, the neck hole might be way too small. So that's why I've made the neck bigger. And it's, this is sort of more casual style anyway, which is why we don't have the waist dart in the front. We've just got a side dart here too. So I've loosened it up a bit, made it a bit more casual. So they're just the front and the back pieces. And then we also have, yep.
Sorry, if you're trying to figure out how big to make the neck, you can just put a tape measure around your head.
And then add a couple of extra centimetres,
and then check it to the neckline.
Yep.
Sure.
You can, if you just measure your head and don't add any ease onto it, generally you can pull that over your head because you can squash your nose up a bit and your ears. But generally, exactly. And keep in mind too that when people are trying these clothes on, if they've got makeup and their neck hole's small and they have to pull it over the head, half their makeup is going to end up on the neckline of the garment, which you don't want. And so this is just the lining. So again, it's basically exactly the same as the outside layer. I haven't changed the neckline, I haven't cut away the armhole or anything more to take the fact that it's lining into account. That happens with the sewing, not with the pattern making. And then there's just the back, again, exactly the same as the outside layer. So I've got the outer layer here with the wrong side facing up. So this is the right side of the fabric facing the right side of the lining. You can see it's a brighter print there. I'm just going to sew the front neck first. So I'm going to match it up at the shoulder here and start about 3 or 4 centimeters down from the raw edge there. And I didn't mention before, but on the block here we have, or on our pattern, we have a 6 millimeter neck and 6 millimeters on a seam allowance, on the neck and the armholes. The shoulders and the side seams are all 1 centimeter. So just starting with a back tack, you can put some pins in here if you need to, otherwise just do it by eye. When we get around to the other side, make sure everything's matched up. And again, we've just stopped. So we started and stopped about, actually what is that, 4 centimeters from the shoulder. Now, this is the only bit of understitching I do on the garment is around the front neck. So what we do there for the understitching, we can't start right at this point here. We need to start down a little bit lower because we need this to be able to open up to finish off the rest of this seam. So we're you can see where that is, starting another centimeter or 1.5 centimeters further down there. I'm understitching, so I'm sewing it through the lining and through the seam allowances of the lining and the outer bodice as well. And that's just a pin stitch, so use the inside edge of your foot, flatten everything out so you don't run over anything underneath.
You can see that really well with the thread.
Oh, that's good.
Of course, normally you do it in a matching colour so you don't see it.
Exactly.
As much, good for the video. stopping short at the end.
So yeah, exactly. So that's where my stitching originally stopped, and I've stopped the understitching down about 1.5 centimeters down from there. Okay, and you'll see that the reason I've done that around that neckline is so that when this rolls under, that like it pushes the lining down once that's been given a good press as well.
So you don't see any of it peeking out.
Exactly. So now we just have to do the armholes. So again, I'm starting not right at the end here. Oh, actually, on this side, I'll show you 2 different ways of finishing this. So on this side, I will actually sew all the way to the edge. Now, what happens here is that what we want is this width of the lining to be a little bit shorter, and you can see on this one here. So this is where we're headed. Whoop. Show you the front armhole. So you can see here on this one, this is the one with an all-in-one facing, which will be another video. You can see how this is the inside, and you can see how that seam has just pushed towards the inside. So on the outside of the armhole, it's the armhole, this is the shoulder here. You can see that you don't see any of that, that seam because it's tucked under just slightly. And the way that we do that is just to make the lining a little bit smaller. If you were doing this in production, you would probably alter the pattern for the lining and actually cut off 2 millimeters around the armhole. But because we're just making a one-off, I'm just going to manipulate it. And actually what I've done here is I should have, so that I can actually see the lining coming out, I should have the lining underneath. So the idea is that we're going to just pull the lining out. So we've got a 6 millimeter seam allowance around the armhole, but this sort of makes it as if we have an 8 millimeter seam allowance on the lining and a 6 millimeter on the outer garment itself.
And this is quite a common practice to do anywhere where you've got a facing or a lining.
Yeah, and it replaces the need for understitching. So just pull it over. You can see there's just that, that 2 millimeters going around the curve. And when you get back down into the underarm, you just take it back to the 6 mil where they join up again. Okay, so you can see that. And I'll do the same on the other side.
And on this side, you're starting a bit further back from the side.
Oh, exactly. Good. Oh, you're onto it, Libby. Thank you. Yeah. So I've left. I'm starting about 2.5 centimeters because the side seams are going to be different methods. I'm starting this a bit further away because I need that gap.
And you can just choose which way you want to do it. There's always lots of different ways to do most things. So.
Exactly, yeah. It might depend on the fabrication or the style or whatever.
It's hard to hold it for a long distance.
Yes, there we go. And that's why, I mean, you could actually trim this back before you started sewing. If you wanted to, if you find that it's really hard for you to gauge that 2 millimeters, you could trim the lining back if you wanted to. Okay, so that's our front done, and then for our back, we're going to do the same. So we've got right sides together, and I'm just going to sew the back neck. I don't think I'm going to be bothered doing an understitch around the back neck because it's quite flat. It's easier to easier just to press and get it right anyway.
You could try. I'd probably do an understitch.
All right, let's do an understitch then. Good.
I just like it. It just makes it easier over at the iron.
True. So again, I've stopped I've started and stopped about 3 centimeters away from the raw edge of the shoulder. I think the reason I wouldn't do understitching around here is because you know, the understitching actually has to start here, so it's actually down quite low around the neck. It doesn't go up into the shoulder. But that's not to say you could probably get in there and do the understitching after the garment was made anyway, because this is quite high and flat. Just a bit trickier to do with the front armhole. So let's just leave that for the minute.
Don't let me sway you on the way you do things. We often have different ways we do things.
So because these the side seams are going to be sewn together, this needs to match, because the other side goes all the way to the edge. This one, so I just had to check to make sure that I'm starting these similar, so I can, you know, show you the two different ways of finishing things. So we'll pull this across at the top.
So this one needs to be pulled across the 2 right from the top.
Yep. But we'll go back to matching it under the arm here. And then, yeah, just pull it over. So, yeah, I'm just doing this by eye as I go along, just because I've, you know, done it a few times. But yeah, if you're struggling to get your head around, you know, you can just, you know, trim the lining away. That way you've just got the raw edges matching and you don't have to think too much about it. So this is the one where we're starting right from the edge here. And just when this is falling in place, you can see the lining is sticking out a bit at the top. Don't let it stick out, you know, actually move it into position, because we need everything to match along the way. Yes, remember you're the one in control of the sewing.
I was just thinking.
It's
You tell the machine and that you're in charge.
exactly. You know what's happening.
Okay.
So we've sewn our armholes, front neckline, which we've understitched. The other armhole, pulling out the 2 millimeters here. Same on the back with the back neckline. Now we need to actually get this up inside here. So the way that we do that is that we get this and we pull this one out. And you always go with the thinner one. So this front neckline makes the shoulder, you know, like longer and thinner than on the back, because we have a higher back neck. So I'm just pulling this out, as you can see there's the armhole. This is the front neckline. I just need to pull out the other side as well. In some methods that you'll probably see on YouTube or wherever, they won't do it like this. They'll do it in a slightly different way, but then they'll have to finish up doing hand stitching, whereas this method doesn't have any hand stitching at all. So then what we need to do is we lift the back up here, and with the right side on the right side, we push this up into the shoulder. And so we've got the right sides of the lining facing each other and the right sides of the outer layer facing each other.
That's really easy. That's an easy thing to do.
And so, yeah, it's sort of think about where you're headed, you know, and work backwards from that point to see, you know, like how it's actually going to work. Because it's so tempting to sew around the armhole, sew around the neckline, like do it all the way around there, and then go, oh, how do I pull it through? If you've got a separate back, if you've got a centre back seam, you can pull it through the shoulder. But if you don't, you can't. So you have to really do it, in a method like this or similar to this.
Or you end up doing a lot of unpicking. You can
exactly.
pull it through.
Yeah. So that's why, you know, like if you think it's going to work the way that, you know, like you've seen it or whatever, or the way that you're imagining it, thing to do is literally just get some pins and pin it and then try and pull it through and see how that goes. So what we do now that we've got these sewn here, we need to just get in and we need to pull this out. So I'm just grabbing onto the lining and I'm pulling this further out. My fingers are particularly slippery today, so they're not. There we go. So you can see here, so you can see the front neck, and you can see that if we open this up here, and we open it up on the other side, and remember too that when you pull this back, you can pull it back to take that 2 millimeters into account as well that you did before. So just line up the shoulder seams here. Pull the lining out a little bit. And just check that it hasn't, the seam ounces haven't folded over on themselves. And you can see that's the neckline inside, so you can just give that a push it, like sort of squash it up a little bit so that it doesn't get in the way and you don't sew through there.
And this neckline is even, isn't it? Not
Yeah, we didn't pull this one back, so you've just got the raw edges matching here. Okay, so you can see we've finished. So this is where we were, and this is what we've ended up with. So lots of stopping and starting, but really, to me, it's the it's the only way that it's going to work effectively. Now, I'm not going to pull that out just yet because what I don't want to do is create any weird twists or anything. So you can see I've got this front-facing flat on the inside here, and my shoulder. So I'm going to push this up in here, I'm grabbing it with my fingers and pulling that out. And again, right sides together for the front and back at the shoulder. Whoop. And then the same with the lining over here. So really, this is the sort of thing where some people have this great idea that they're going to come into studio and they're going to smash something out. I think this shows you really that when it comes to sewing, there's no smashing out of anything unless you're going to do a really bodgy job. I've mentioned this in several of my videos, but just things take a long time to be done nicely. So, take the time, come up with a great product. And really, you should be comparing what you're making with, what's available in store. You should really be headed for a commercial product. And I said to somebody once, I said, while your stuff is new and exciting and fresh when you're starting out as a designer and you're making all these one-off things, you could, when people are really excited about your stuff and owning some of your stuff, I think they're probably more likely to be a bit generous, with the quality of your garments if the quality isn't really up to scratch because they're just excited to have something of yours. But I think it gets to the point where, they'll actually only spend the money on, on a quality product, because you can get stuff, at H&M so cheap, and if that's the comparison that they're making, your product has to be at least as good as that product, I think. And for some people it's never going to matter, but I think it should matter to you when you're creating a product. And even if it gets to the point where you're not actually doing the sewing yourself, you have to have a quality idea in your head so that you can tell the people that are working for you, whether they're reaching the level of quality or not. Okay, so now we pull out.
Oh, it's magic.
And we've got our shoulders, so that needs a good press. And you can see here how that lining, like once it's pressed, it'll just push under slightly, and there won't be any need for top stitching around there. So just to finish this, our two methods. Now this is the method that I go with. So we've got our side seams there. So there's our neckline, our back, our front has the darts. So we fold these together. Yep, so I've got the lining together and the outer layers together. Make sure that the dart stays down, it doesn't flip back up the wrong way. Just side seam on our lining. Now those side seams should be pressed open, and then we're going to, once they're pressed open, what I'm doing now, and this is a method that I use on doing the side seams because I like that flow through. Sometimes it's a bit harder to do when you're doing the other method. It's harder to achieve a nice smooth underarm if you're using the other method, which we'll show you next.
Yeah, I always do the other way particularly.
And then that flips back. And then we have our,
So you get nice even.
have our underarm there. That's on the outside. And press that seam allowance open, press this one open. Or the other thing you can do too is you could have, because this is fully lined, you could press the side seam towards the back on the outer fabric and towards the front on the inner fabric to just to even out the bulk. But whereas if you press both of them open, that amounts to the same sort of thickness anyway. So this is our other side seam, and because we've sewn all the way to the edge, so I've got my raw edges together. Is that a bit tricky to see? Let me just. So this is it here. So we're just holding these two layers together, and we're going to pull this around.
So it's just one continuous seam.
Exactly, yeah.
Lining and
so we're going to push both of those. Push those linings towards that, and because we want the seam allowance to go that way, we're going to start up the top here. So this is actually the waist.
Really important to get those seams matched up. And it
Exactly.
can sometimes be tricky because as you're going over it, it might just push out a millimetre or.
Yeah. So you can see there my two underarm seams. Seam allowance is going towards the lining. You could put a pin in there if you want, but I'm just going to do it by eye. Again, make sure that the dart doesn't flip up the wrong way. It needs to face down towards the waist. And also too, this one's poking out a little bit there, so we just need to get that back in line.
So your pattern's correct, it shouldn't stick out like that.
Yeah. And the reason I don't like this too is that I know when I do it, it actually never seems to match on the underarm for one reason or another.
I don't know, just the feed dog and the foot and that, it just seems to push it apart to get over
Exactly.
the bulk.
So again, our dart facing down towards the waist. And then I would press this seam open all the way through, and then that folds down.
Let's see how well.
Yeah. Oh, look, it did go off. Like it's a millimetre
Yeah,
off.
it's a millimetre.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So once you've got these seam allowances pressed open, then you just need to roll everything and like give that a good press.
It's going to look okay.
Yeah, it will. I
the
just
outside.
I just don't like
Yeah.
that funny lump that you get there. So what I'll do is I'll give this a good press now, and then I'll put it on the dummy and we'll have another look at it.
Okay.
So here's the finished product. You can see here, you can actually catch a little glimpse of the lining underneath. But remember that this is a particularly obvious contrast lining as well. If you're lining it in a matching colour, like the little glimpses would be a lot less noticeable. So this is the side where we've sewn the two side seams and then gone around here. The other thing too is that if you're worried about this coming out, you could actually put a top stitch around the armhole as well, and then sort of just roll that under a tiny bit more so that it's really not showing. So yeah, so that's a really nice clean armhole there.
Or you could just understitch it.
Well, yeah, you could
get in there
exactly. You could still understitch. That's
Yeah.
true, Libby. You'd probably only get up to about here.
Yeah.
So you would have to do some good pressing over the shoulder. But yeah, you could understitch from here around to here.
But it's
So
out that
see how
shoulder
you
area,
go.
which is the main thing. That
Yeah.
It's poking out on that shoulder.
And you
area.
can see that that's nice and like it's nice and even and
Yeah.
flush and smooth around here. Because there's no hand stitching, like sometimes they get you to sew the outside one and then the lining you have to push the seam allowances under and hand stitch it, whereas this it's all done by machine, so you get a really nice smooth shape there. So this is probably as fitted, I think, as you would get without any darts, so that this could still go over somebody's head, just with the bust dart there in the front. And if you extended that into a shift, that'd be just like a little shift dress. So that's our all-in-one lining.